Hello and welcome to Crimson Ray. This is my review of Unseen Immortal of 300 Years, 不见上仙三百年. The novel was written by Musuli and has 128 chapters with 8 extra chapters. The novel has a Xianxia setting and starts with the protagonist waking up in a body that doesn't belong to him. He then learns that this body belongs to the most reviled and infamous demon in the world, Wu Xingxue. While trying to escape from the prison that this demon has been put in, he comes across the spirit of a heavenly immortal, Xiao Fuxuan, who, after hearing his story, agrees to help him with this reverse body snatching predicament. They set off together from the prison, and along with them come 2 of the demon's most trusted henchmen. Along the way, they have many adventures, and they also unravel the secrets of the past, slowly unveiling the sequence of events that led them to this moment. I want to start by talking about the writing. This author really has a talent for descriptive imagery. Each scene, each location, each character is described in such lush detail that it paints a very vivid mental picture. I think that this is one of the reasons why this novel has some of the most beautiful fan art I've ever seen for any novel, especially for a novel that doesn't yet have a drama or donghua adaptation. The author makes use of a lot of Chinese idioms and Chinese poetry, and also seems to have a penchant for wordplay, which you can tell from the title of the novel in Mandarin. I also want to talk about the translator here, because the translator did a very good job of translating those references, which are sometimes obscure and can't be directly translated to English. And the translator was also very transparent about their process of translating and the translation choices that they made, which I always appreciate in any translated work. Although I haven't read the novel in the original language, I do want to say that the prose in this translated work is very refined, some of the most refined that I've come across in any danmei translated work so far. And I think that's due in part to the author's natural prose, as it is known for being of a high quality, and also in the translator's hard work and effort in bringing that lyrical, sometimes whimsical quality of the prose to the English translation. The novel is written with a melancholy, sometimes light-hearted tone, and veers a lot more into the dramatic and romantic as opposed to comedy. It can sometimes get a bit heavy, especially toward the climax. You don't have a lot of those light-hearted moments to break up the tension. However, those scenes that are a bit heavy and do carry a bit more weight are important and imperative for actually telling the story, and the extra chapters do help to cushion the blow after the climax and give you a whole lot of fluffy, soft, romantic, and just really funny moments. So let's talk about the plot. The story of the novel has a strong focus on karma and the cycle of death and rebirth. It ruminates on the nature of being human and the choices that we can make due to emotional distress or even to love. These themes are interspersed throughout the novel and are fleshed out with each chapter and with each story arc, all leading to a final conclusion that is quite satisfying, although quite weighty with the emotional impact. However, the plot can get confusing at times, and I'll explain why. In the world of the novel, it is possible for someone to create an alternate timeline and right any wrongs or change any actions that they regret in the current present timeline. For example, a loved one passing away. Even though these timelines are not reality, they can and do have an effect on the present world. And due to the meddling of the characters who've created these alternate realities, certain plot points and certain characters change and shift around on these timelines. So what makes it confusing is just keeping track of the plot points and characters that have shifted and changed across different timelines, and making sense of how it links to the present world and what the effect of those changes are. However, Even though it's a bit difficult to understand, I think the author did such a good job of actually tying those events together, of thinking through the cause and effect of each of those actions that were changed, and of really capturing what each character would think of going back to change. Because of how confusing it is, I did end up reading the novel twice before making this review, just to solidify my understanding of the plot and the characters and the things that changed across different timelines, which I didn't manage to pick up in the first reading. Although I've read many Xianxia novels and watched many Xianxia dramas, this novel feels quite fresh. There are some unexpected story beats and reveals throughout the novel, however each reveal feels earned, and I think that the novel as a whole just has a very meaty and satisfying plot. Let's talk a bit about the characters. Wu Xingxue is one of my favorite danmei protagonists and one of the best written protagonists that I've read about in a long while. What I love most about him is his compassion for living beings, his sense of justice, and his persistence. I like the way that he makes decisions and that he's committed to the follow-through of those decisions and the consequences of those actions that he takes. He's just such a beautiful and well-written character that I couldn't help but root for him, and my heart really ached whenever he struggled and whenever he had setbacks. There's a lot more that I can say about him, but I'll talk about it when we get to spoilers. Some of the other characters that I really liked are Yun Hai. I found him to be very mischievous and funny. I also really liked Yi Wusheng. I think he had a noble elegance and grace to him, and even though she made a very brief appearance, it was so impactful, and I really love Feng Zhuyuan. As a whole though, this novel was a bit polarizing for me in terms of characterization, and the main reason is the characters who were important to the story and who had full story arcs were all well fleshed out, well defined. They had clear motivations and individual desires as well as beliefs. However, when it came to the characters who weren't as important and who were more side characters, they did feel a bit flat to me. For example, there were certain immortals that were described, but they weren't distinct enough for me to remember their individual and personal character traits. And then when the author dropped Easter eggs about them in some of the timelines in some of the chapters, I had to go back and check who she was talking about. It was a bit more easy on the second read through, but there were still some things that I missed. Another character I just want to briefly talk about is Xiao Fu Xuan. Although he is one of the main characters and he is important to the story, I also felt that his characterization was just lacking a little something. So he's a character whose motivations really do revolve around the person that he loves and doing everything for that person. And while there's nothing wrong with the character motivation, I think it's perfectly fine. And you could say that a character like Hua Cheng from Tianguan Sifu has a similar character motivation. In Tianguan Sifu, I feel that Hua Cheng has so much of his own natural charisma and his own personality, whereas that's what I felt was lacking from Xiao Fu Xuan. He just didn't stand out as a standalone character, and we didn't explore enough of him, I feel, aside from his relationship with Wu Xingxue. Which brings me to the romance. The romance in this novel is a slow burn, with a lot of longing and long periods of separation. However, when the two characters do finally get together, it's really satisfying, and there are some intense moments as well. It's really just pure love and understanding and devotion, with a bit of light-hearted humor and some teasing thrown in. And although I've spoken about Xiao Fu Xuan's characterization being a little lacking, when he's with Wu Xingxue, I think that's when he really shines and it brings out the best in him. And so together they're really interesting, really intriguing, and they just have a very deep bond and connection, and it's a very interesting relationship to read about. There are some heartbreaking moments, but there are also some very funny and ridiculous moments, mainly courtesy of Wu Xingxue and his ridiculousness. I want to briefly touch on the physical intimacy, just for those of you who want to know about it. It is described, and the two are intimate, however, it's not described in explicit detail. For example, the author will mention that they kissed, but the author won't describe the kiss in detail. So if you're looking for something like that, then this novel is for you. My final thoughts. I really loved this story, and I couldn't wait to get to each chapter. I stayed up a few nights just binging the chapters, and I do not regret it, not even one little bit. And I really appreciate that the author was able to bring something fresh to the genre, especially in a genre that's so heavy with tropes, and where a lot of the stories really follow the same story beats. It was really refreshing to read something like this that really is that little bit different. The highlights of the novel for me were the protagonist, the romance between the two characters, and also the plot and how well constructed it was. So if you're looking for a romantic, sometimes dramatic danmei that's not too trope heavy, that's a Xianxia setting, and that has a really satisfying and fulfilling romance, then I think that you'll really like this novel. Thank you so much for listening to my review. I hope that maybe this inspired you to pick it up. I think it's a brilliant novel. For those of you who have already read the novel or who don't care about spoilers, let's talk spoilers. The first thing I want to talk about is, of course, Wu Xingxue. What I like about him, other than the things I mentioned in the non-spoiler section, is that you often in stories like this, you see characters or protagonists who say that even if a choice they made didn't turn out well, that they would do it all again because it was the right choice and they believe in it and they have conviction. But it's very rare that that same character then has to make the exact same choice and they're put in the exact same position, except now they know the full consequences of their choice. And Wu Xingxue really did get put in that position again, the exact same position on the chaotic line, and he still made the decision to split his soul, to destroy the divine arbor, and to bring peace to the world, even though he knew the pain that he would experience, and even though he suffered so much trauma after making that choice in the present, the real timeline. And I just really admire that. And I love a character that has that kind of conviction and that sense of morality. And I think what also made him stand apart is, even though he's not human, he has such compassion and care for human life. So I really admire that about him. Something that I also like about the story is that they actually collapsed Ling Tai heavenly law in the end. And that's something I've always wanted to see in a Xianxia story, where heaven is obviously so corrupt and so beyond redemption that there is no other conclusion but to collapse it. And in some stories you kind of see that maybe they'll change the heavenly emperor or they'll just remove some of the bad characters, but then the status quo remains the same. So I love that in this story they just got rid of it. They didn't even care. The author just went for it, and she did such a brilliant job of it. And I love in the end when Xiao Fuxuan did his interrogation on Ling Tai, and it had that line. It just gave me chills where they said, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was that he questioned on behalf of all mortals, how did you come to be? I just felt it was so satisfying and so incredible to see that. So I loved that part of the story arc and that part of the climax. It was just brilliant. The two characters that really gave me a lot of pain other than Xiao Fuxuan and Wu Xingxue was Hua Xin and Yun Hai. Oh, these two. I think the tragedy of their story is just that they both really loved and cared for each other, but they couldn't express it. And they tried to express it in their own ways, but they just never communicated that with each other. And because of their own personal beliefs and their upbringing and their own trauma, they couldn't express it openly to one another. And that was part of the tragedy, was that to Hua Xin, Yun Hai was the most important person, someone that he dearly loved and cared for. And all Yun Hai really wanted was Hua Xin's approval and reassurance and his love and his caring. And they just missed that in the present timeline. So in the chaotic line, when Yun Hai realized that the demon was Hua Xin and that he turned that way because he really loved him and he became obsessed and was just desperate to bring him back, that really made me tear up a little, especially when he went to the chaotic line Hua Xin and told him, if anything happens to me, just know that I'm okay with it. Don't do anything. Just leave it. And I think it was a beautiful moment between the two, and it just made me tear up. The last thing I want to say about those two is that extra chapter where they meet in the immortal realm. I really wish that it went on a bit longer. I would have loved to see more of their story together, and especially Yunhai's reaction if he's going to recognize Huaxin, and basically what do they do from there and how do their lives turn out from there. It would have been really nice to see. Something in Xiao Fuxuan and Wu Xingxue's relationship that really made me sad and made me think so deeply about it is when Wu Xingxue kept disguising himself as a mortal person and meeting up with Xiao Fuxuan because he really just wanted to speak to him, even though every time they spoke he felt so sad and upset afterward because Xiao Fuxuan never recognized him and they could only exchange small talk and pleasantries. That was just something that made me think, how did Wu Xingxue feel in that moment? For 300 years, his beloved one basically didn't know who he was, didn't remember him. And they would meet, and he had all of these memories and those loving moments in his head, and Xiao Fuxuan just thought that he was a normal guy. I know it's a bit deeper than that we found out Xiao Fuxuan knew it was Wu Xingxue, but he didn't know the history. So I was so happy that Xiao Fuxuan, even though he suffered, he did what he needed to do in order to remember everything, and I'm so glad he did that because their story is so special and so unique, and I'm so glad that they both remembered it because they have such a deep bond. So I'm glad they both remember everything now, and they know just how deep and how special that bond is between the two of them, and they can take care of each other by the end of the story. So I'm presuming if you're here, you've read the novel, so let me know what are your favorite parts. Just write spoiler at the top of the comment if you are going to put a spoiler. What are your favorite parts or your favorite characters, and which part made you tear up, and which parts did you think were really funny? And thank you so much for watching. I really, really, really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.